When he died, he was away from home, and many years had passed since the baby had been left on the mountain. It was reported that a band of robbers had slain him together with his attendants, all except one, who brought the news home. The matter was not carefully investigated because Thebes was in sore straits at the time. The country around was beset by a frightful monster, the Sphinx, a creature shaped like a winged lion, but with the breast and face of a woman. Sometimes the spirits take on forms to have certain effects on people more than their that being inherent forms of them. She lay in wait for the wayfarers along the roads to the city, and whomsoever she sees she would put a riddle to, telling him if he could answer it, she would let him go. No one could. And the horrible creature devoured man after man until the city was in a state of siege. The 7 great gates, which were the Thebans' pride, remained closed, and the famine drew near to the citizens. This can refer to the chakras, whether you're thinking of them in a straight line or not, alchemical stages and that sort of thing. So people who've closed off their spiritual side, and these are the same that might psychosomatically hurt themselves when spirits come doing things, but I don't believe that ghouls exist. There aren't the spirits that physically harm people. Some people believe they could be in lamps or hiding along the roadside and various things. So matters stood when there came into the stricken country a stranger, a man of great courage and great intelligence, whose name was Oedipus. He had left his home, Corinth, where he was held to be the son of the king, Polybus, and the reason for his self-exile was another Delphic oracle. Apollo had declared that he was fated to kill his father. He too, like Laius, thought to make it impossible for the oracle to come true. He resolved never to see Polybus again. In his lonely wanderings, he came into the country around Thebes, and he heard what was happening there. He was a homeless, friendless man to whom life meant little, and he determined to seek the Sphinx out and try to solve the riddle. What creature, the Sphinx asked him, goes on 4 feet in the morning, on 2 at noonday, on 3 in the evening? Man, answered Oedipus. In childhood he creeps on hands and feet. In manhood he walks erect. In old age he helps himself with the staff. It was the right answer. The Sphinx, inexplicably but most fortunately, killed herself. While some spirits put on shows like that, maybe to provoke future humans to kill themselves in this case. The Thebans were saved. Oedipus gained all the more than he left. The grateful citizens made him their king, and he married the dead king's wife, Jocasta. For many years they lived happily. It seemed that in this case Apollo's words had been proven to be false. But when their 2 sons had grown to manhood, Thebes was visited by a terrible plague. A blight fell upon everything. Not only were men dying throughout the country, the flocks and herds and the fruits of the field were blasted as well. Those who were spared death by disease faced death by famine. No one suffered more than Oedipus. He regarded himself as the father of the whole state. The people in it were his children. The misery of each one was his too. He dispatched Jocasta's brother, Creon, to Delphi to implore the entity's help. Creon returned with good news. Apollo had declared that the plague would be stayed upon one condition. Whoever had murdered King Laius must be punished. Oedipus was enormously relieved. Surely the men or the man could be found even after all these years, and they would know well how to punish him. He proclaimed to the people gathered to hear the message Creon brought back, "Let no one of this land give shelter to him. Bar him from your homes as one defiled, companioned by pollution, and solemnly I pray may he who killed wear out his life in evil, being evil. Well, not all killing's evil, but Oedipus took the matter in hand with energy. He sent for Tiresias, the old blind prophet, the most revered of Thebans. Had he any means of finding out, he asked him who the guilty were. To his amazement and indignation, the seer at first refused to answer. For the love of God, Oedipus implored him, if you have knowledge. Fools, Tiresias said. Fools, all of you, I will not answer. But when Oedipus went so far as to accuse him of keeping silence because he had himself taken part in the murder, the prophet in his turn was angered, and words he had meant never to speak fell heavily from his lips. You are yourself the murderer you seek. To Oedipus, the old man's mind was wandering. What he said was sheer madness. He ordered him out of his sight, and never again to appear before him. So, I guess maybe basalt cliffs or something like that is what the Sphinx is propped up on, with paws, sort of relaxed looking, but not really like a lion, but more like a dog standing on alert. And here's this guy below the cliff. There's grass but not completely. And his tunic or robe or whatnot is flowing, and he's like, Jocasta, too, treated the assertion with scorn. Neither prophets nor oracles have any knowledge, she said. She told her husband how the priestess at Delphi had prophesied that Laius should die at the hand of his son, and now he and she together had seen to it that this should not happen by having the child killed, and Laius was murdered by robbers where 3 roads meet on the way to Delphi. She concluded triumphantly. Oedipus gave her a strange look. When did this happen? He asked slowly. Just before you came to Thebes, she said. How many were with him? Oedipus asked. They were 5 in all. Jocasta spoke quickly. All killed but one. I must see that man, he told her. Send for him. I will, she said, at once, but I have a right to know what is in your mind. You shall know all that I know, he answered. I went to Delphi just before I came here because a man had flung it in my face that I was not the son of Polybus. I went to ask the entity. He did not answer me, but he told me horrible things, that I should kill my father, marry my mother, and have children men would shudder to look upon. I never went back to Corinth. On my way from Delphi, at a place where 3 roads met, I came upon a man with 4 attendants. He tried to force me from the path. He struck me with his stick. Angered, I fell upon them, and I killed them. Could it be the leader was Laius? The one man left alive brought back a tale of robbers. Jocasta said, Laius was killed by robbers, not by his son, the poor innocent who died upon the mountain. As they talked, a further proof seemed given them that Apollo could speak falsely. A messenger came from Corinth to announce to Oedipus the death of Polybus. O oracle of the entity, Jocasta cried, where are you now? The man died, but not by his son's hand. The messenger smiled wisely. Did the fear of killing your father drive you from Corinth? He asked. O king, you were in error. You never had reason to fear, For you were not the son of Polybus. He brought you up as though you were his, but he took you from my hands. Where did you get me? Oedipus asked. Who were my father and mother? I know nothing of them. The messenger said, a wandering shepherd gave you to me, a servant of Lautius. Jocasta turned white. A look of horror was on her face. Why waste a thought upon what such a fellow says? She cried. Nothing he says can matter. She spoke hurriedly, yet fiercely. Oedipus could not understand her. My birth does not matter, he asked. For God's sake, go no further, she said. My misery is enough. She broke away and rushed into the palace. At that moment, an old man entered. He and the messenger eyed each other curiously. The very man, O king, the messenger cried, the shepherd who gave you to me. And you, Oedipus asked the other, do you know him as he knows you? The old man did not answer, but the messenger insisted. You must remember, you gave me once a little child you had found, and the king here is that child. Curse you, the other muttered. Hold your tongue. What? Oedipus said angrily. You would conspire with him to hide from me what I desire to know? There are ways, to be sure, to make you speak. The old man wailed. Oh, do not hurt me. I did give him the child, but do not ask more, master, for the love of God. If I have to order you a second time to tell me where you got him, you are lost. Oedipus said, ask your lady. The old man cried, she can tell you best. She gave him to you? Asked Oedipus. Oh yes, oh yes. The other groaned. I was to kill the child. There was a prophecy, Oedipus repeated, that he should kill his father. Yes, the old man whispered. A cry of agony came from the king. At last he understood. All true. Now shall my light be changed to darkness. I am accursed. He had murdered his father. He had married his father's wife, his own mother. There was no help for him, for her, for their children. All were accursed. Within the palace, Oedipus wildly sought for his wife. That was his mother. He found her in her chamber. She was dead. When the truth broke upon her, she had killed herself. Standing beside her, he too turned his hand against himself, but not to end his life. He changed his light to darkness. He put out his eyes. The black world of blindness was the refuge. Better to be there than to see with strange, shamed eyes the old world that had been so bright. Continue your brightness and realize, consider more who you're killing and who you're, having sexual relations with. Thank you very much. Not, look at that. So I figure in my society that's even more of a risk, because people not knowing who their parents are and who their family is, and Antigone. I've taken this story from Antigone and the Oedipus at Colonus, two of Sophocles' plays, with the exception of the death of Menœchus, which is told in a play of Euripides, the Suppliants. After Jocasta's death, and all the evils that came with it, Oedipus lived on in Thebes while his children were growing up. He had two sons, Polynices and Eteocles, and two daughters, Antigone and Ismene. They were very unfortunate young people, but they were far from being monsters all would shudder to look at, as the oracle had told Oedipus. The two lads were very well liked by the Thebans, and the two girls were as good daughters as a man could have. Oedipus, of course, resigned the throne. Polynices, the elder son, did the same. The Thebans felt that this was wise because of the terrible position of the family, and they accepted Creon, Jocas's brother, as the regent. For many years they treated Oedipus with kindness, but at last they decided to expel him from the city. What induced them to do this was not known, but Creon urged it, and Oedipus's sons consented to it. The only friends Oedipus had were his daughters. Through all his misfortunes, they were faithful to him. When he was driven out of the city, Antigone went with him to guide him in his blindness and care for him, and Ismene stayed in Thebes to look out for his interests and keep him informed of whatever happened that touched him. After he had gone, his two sons asserted their right to the throne, and each tried to be made king. Eteocles succeeded, although he was the younger, and he expelled his brother from Thebes. Polynices took refuge in Argos and did all he could to arouse enmity against Thebes. His intention was to collect an army to march against the city. In the course of their desolate wanderings, Oedipus and Antigone came to Colonus, a lovely spot near Athens, where the one-time Erinyes, the Furies, now the benignant female entities, had a place sacred to them, and therefore a refuge for suppliants. The blind old man and his daughter felt safe there, and there Oedipus died. Most unhappy in much of his life, he was happy at the end. The oracle, which once had spoken terrible words to him, comforted him when he was dying. Apollo promised that he, the disgraced, the homeless wanderer, would bring to the place where his grave should be a mysterious blessing from the entities. Theseus, the king of Athens, received him with all honor, and the old man died, rejoicing that he was no longer hateful to men, but welcomed as a benefactor to the land that harbored him. Ismene, who had come to tell her father the good news of this oracle, was with her sister when he died, and afterwards they were both sent safely home by Theseus. They arrived to find one brother marching against their city, resolved to capture it, and the other determined to defend it to the end. Polynices, the one who attached it, had the better right to it, but the younger Eteocles was fighting for Thebes to save her from capture. It was impossible for the two sisters to take sides against either brother. Polynices had been joined by 6 chieftains, one of them the king of Argos, Adrastus, and another Adrastus's brother-in-law, Amphiaraus. This last joined the enterprise most unwillingly, because he was a prophet and he knew that none of the 7 would come back alive except Adrastus. So what does Adrastus represent versus the others? However, he was under oath to let his wife, Eriphyla, decide whenever there was a dispute between him and her brother. He had sworn this once when he and Adrastus had quarreled, and Eriphyla had reconciled them. Polynices, won her over to his side by bribing her with the wonderful necklace that had been the wedding gift of his ancestress Harmonia, and she made her husband go to the war. There were 7 champions to attack the 7 gates of Thebes, and 7 others within, as bold to defend them. Eteocles defended the gate which Polynices attacked, and Antigone and Ismene within the palace waited to hear which had killed the other. But before any decisive combat had taken place, a youth in Thebes, not yet grown to manhood, had died for his country, and in his death had shown himself the noblest of all. This was Creon's younger son, Menœchus, Tiresias, the prophet who had brought so many distressful prophecies to the royal family, came to bring still another. He told Creon that Thebes would be saved only if Menœchus was killed. The father utterly refused to bring this about. He would be willing to die himself, he said, but not even for my own city will I slay my own son, which is sort of the ethics that a person should have, right? He begged the boy, unless, you need to impose the death penalty, then. He bade the boy who was present when Tiresias spoke, "Up, my child, and fly with all speed from the land before the city learns." "Where, father?" asked the lad. "What city seek? What friend? Far, far away." The father answered, "I will find means, I will find gold. Go and get it then," said Menœchus. But when Creon had hurried away, he spoke other words. "My father, he would rob our town of hope, make me a coward. Ah, well, he is old, and so to be forgiven, but I am young. If I betray Thebes, there is no forgiveness. How can he think I will not save the city, and, for her sake, go forth to meet my death? What would my life be if I fled away, when I can free my country?" He went to join the battle, and, all unskilled in warfare, he was killed at once. Neither the besiegers nor the besieged could gain any real advantage, and finally both sides agreed to let the matter be decided by a combat between the brothers. If Eteocles was the victor, the Argive army would withdraw. If Eteocles was conquered, Polynicus should be king. Neither was victor. They killed each other. Eteocles, dying, looked upon his brother and wept. He had no strength to speak. Polynicus could murmur a few words, "My brother, my enemy," but loved, always loved. "Bury me in my homeland, to have so much, at least, of my city." The combat had decided nothing, and the battle was renewed. But Menœchus had not died in vain, and in the end the Thebans prevailed, and of the 7 champions all were killed except Adrastus only. He fled with the broken army to Athens. In Thebes, Creon was in control, and he proclaimed that none of those who had fought against the city should be given burial. Eteocles should be honored with every right that the noblest received at death, but Polynicus should be left for beasts and birds to tear and devour. This was to carry vengeance beyond the ordinance of those that they considered to be gods, beyond the law of right. It was to punish the dead. The souls of the unburied might not pass the river that encircles the kingdom of death, but must wander in desolation with no abiding place, no rest ever for their weariness. To bury the dead was a most sacred duty, not only to bury one's own, but any stranger one might come upon. But this duty, Creon's proclamation said, was changed in the cause of Polynicus to a crime. He who buried him would be put to death. Antigone and Ismene heard with horror what Creon had decided. To Ismene, shocking as it was, overwhelming her with anguish for the pitiful dead body and the lonely, homeless soul, it seemed nevertheless that nothing could be done except to acquiesce. She and Antigone were utterly alone. All Thebes was exulting that the man who had brought war upon them should be thus terribly punished. "We are women," she told her sister. "We must obey. We have no strength to defy the state." "Choose your own part," Antigone said. "I go to bury the brother I love." "You are not strong enough," Ismene cried. "Why then, when my strength fails," Antigone answered, "I will give up." She left her sister. Ismene dared not follow her. Some hours later, Creon, in the palace, was startled by a shout. "Against your orders, Polynicus has been buried." He hurried out to be confronted with the guards he had set on the dead body and with Antigone. "This girl buried him," they said. "We saw her. A thick dust storm gave her the chance. When it cleared, the body had been buried, and the girl was making an offering to the dead." "You knew my edict?" Creon asked. "Yes," Antigone replied, "and you transgressed the law." "Your law, but not the law of justice. Who dwells with what we consider to be gods?" Antigone said. "The unwritten laws of heaven are not of today nor yesterday, but from all time." Ismene, weeping, came from the palace to stand with her sister. "I helped do it," she said, but Antigone would not have it. She had no share in it, she told Creon, and she bade her sister say no more. Your choice was to live. She said, mine to die. As she was led away to death, she spoke to the bystanders, "Behold me, what I suffer because I have upheld that which is high." Ismene disappears. There is no story, no poem about her. The house of Oedipus, the last of the royal family of Thebes, was known no more. The Seven Against Thebes. Two great writers told this story. It is the subject of one of Aeschylus's plays and one of Euripides's. I have chosen Euripides's version, which, as so often with him, reflects remarkably our own point of view. American, English, I don't know. Aeschylus tells the tale splendidly, but in his hands it is a stirring, martial poem. Euripides's play, The Suppliants, shows his modern mind better than any of the other plays. The tumbly, need to sit up straighter. Polynicus had been given burial at the price of his sister's life. His soul was free to be ferried across the river to find a home among the dead, but 5 of the chieftains who had marched with him to Thebes lay unburied, and according to Creon's decree, would be left so forever. Adrastus, the only one alive of the 7 who had started to war, came to Theseus, king of Athens, to beseech him to induce the Thebans to allow the bodies to be buried. With him were the mothers and sons of the dead men. "All we seek," he told Theseus, "is burial for our dead. We come to you for help because Athens of all cities is compassionate." And